ready. We're ready. Go ahead.
All right. This is your man, the STL stranger, Umar Lee. We are joining you here in the Grove at Rise Coffee Shop. No finer cup of coffee can be had in the city of St. Louis than Rise Coffee. Well, if you're up north of the Coffee House, they just had the door busted in last night and shattered. So I was sure to go there for lunch today to try to help them recuperate some of the costs from that tragic event. We have this panel today. It's called Guns and Ganja. The clever title is from my producer extraordinaire, Mark Lord, who comes up with these catchy titles. And these are two issues that are really at the forefront. And I really feel that if we take the ganja side, the marijuana side, we're really at a moment in time. We remember the polling on same-sex marriage 20 years ago, 15 years ago, was very much in opposition. This was in all 50 states, all regions of the country. And I really feel that we're on this moment where public attitudes are shifting towards marijuana usage, both recreational, medicinal, etc. And so we can have a panel here of political folks who can talk about that, mixed in with the gun issue. Of course, guns are on the news a lot recently. Guns are always on the news. Just tell you a little story. My daughter lives in the suburbs of Dallas, and she's here in St. Louis in the summer with me. And I had to explain to her a lot of things being here in St. Louis. When you hear what you think are fireworks, don't run to the window because it very well be gunshots. July 3rd, we go out to Webster Groves and we enjoy the fireworks. It's a beautiful Andy Griffith Mayberry type of a festivity. And then on July 4th, I don't feel like going downtown, so we watch in front of my building, which you can see downtown from. We're just north of downtown. And a teenager just strolls up, puts up a lawn chair, and sits in front of my building with an AK-47. So, I obviously moved her down just a little bit, but it was, not too, this is, and I'm not an anti-gun guy per se, but I was a little nervous by that teenager with an AK. Obviously, the mass shooting that happened in Florida, in Parkland, Florida, has a lot of people discussing gun policy, and we have a lot of policy makers. We have Megan Green across from me, Alderwoman for the 15th Ward. She was on previously. If you want to know where she went to high school, in Oneonta, New York. If you want to follow her, she's on social media, and she's a candidate for president of the board of Alders.
Yes, you got it.
This person in the middle has not introduced himself. What is your name, sir?
State Representative Shamed Dogan from the 98th District out in West County.
And he went to MICDS High School.
That's right.
And Provel or no Provel?
Oh, Provel all day long.
Team Provel.
Hell yeah.
All right, okay. All right. Can't be all that bad. You're down with Team Provel. Next to him is, and he's a Republican state representative. He's a representative of the Grand Old Party. So next to him is state senator and state representative candidate Maria Chappelle Nadal. You can listen to our wonderful podcast. And I really like that. By the way, I had somebody tell me, you and Maria just sound like two friends on that chat. And I said, look, that was an interesting podcast. Nowhere else you can go, NPR, local media, nowhere else you got Maria Chappelle Nadal talking about the Freaknik and Ludacris, but on my podcast. So Clayton Greyhound graduate, Maria Chappelle Nadal, Democrat. Good to have you.
Thank you.
To my right, we have gentleman Robert Vroman. I'm thinking about Varner because Varner, we have to put him in our thoughts and prayers. He got ran over by a car. I don't know what to do.
Not so close to the speaker.
Okay. Yeah. So, to a bad bike accident in Forest Park. But this Robert is picture perfect health right now. And you used to be the chairman of the Republican Party in the city of St. Louis.
That's correct, in 2014.
And what do you do now?
I am currently on the state committee for the Missouri Republican Party for the 4th Senate District.
I live in the 22nd Ward in North City by the Army base, just south of 70 off Goodfellow.
Big Republican stronghold area.
For a living, I buy and sell properties from the sheriff's tax auctions, which are predominantly in North St. Louis. For business reasons, it got to the point I had so many of them. I own 35 properties in North City that I had to live in North St. Louis to properly manage them. So that I did that in 2016. I've been doing the business since 2011. So I've lived in St. Louis my whole life. I grew up in Ladue. I went to John Burroughs High School, rival of MICS in the prep school circuit, and then ended up in North City. So I've got a lot of political passion, and I've been involved for a long time.
You don't see that John Burroughs to North City move that often. I will tell you, Lucas Hudson. You want to hear no Lucas? Lucas is a John Burroughs guy. I don't know if he lives in North City now, but he's definitely in the city of St. Louis. A former writer, was an Art City Chronicle editor, and then was the editor of what was the name of the newspaper, Maria? The LGBT newspaper. Anyway, he's a local writer, a really smart guy, and now a St. Louis police officer. And a trivia fact for you. So we want to start out with the basic premise. We're going to do part one on guns because on marijuana. She has a Show Me Cannabis shirt on. Robert here, Vroman, is a part of the Republican Party that's generally pro marijuana. Maria, you're not all caught up on people smoking weed. You're not trying to.
I support it wholeheartedly.
You support it wholeheartedly. And Megan, you're pro marijuana person yourself. So we're going to start on the things that we're probably not going to agree on. And no one throw any bottles or anything like that. Guns. And it's a big issue. And so, because I know he'll set it off properly, just basic question number one, on the issue of guns, do you generally side on the side of greater regulation for guns? Do you think regulation is about appropriate now, or do you favor less regulation on guns in America?
I'm strongly pro-gun. I think in Missouri we have about as good as it could get for my position, so I'm satisfied with the status quo.
Maria?
I'm disgusted with the state of things right now when it comes to gun policy. It's unacceptable for 3-year-olds to have access to guns. Unacceptable for people who have mental health issues to go into schools and shoot up 22 children. It's unacceptable that there are 17-year-old girls who are being shot on the porch of their homes, not knowing that someone's going to go around the street. It's unacceptable that people don't report their guns when they're stolen from their cars, their businesses, or their homes. It is something that should be mandated into law so that we can close other crimes and other cases.
Well, it's an interesting subject for me. We just had a town hall in my district about it. We had a lady from Moms Demand Action, as well as a gentleman who owns a gun training course, and we were able to come to some common ground. I think most people respect the Second Amendment and believe that it does protect our right to bear arms, which is something that the Constitution pretty clearly lays out. It's just a question of what arms you're talking about and what individuals should be allowed or shouldn't be allowed to own them. And nobody supports violence, right? But I think the notion that we could eliminate violence by starting a war on guns or continuing a war on guns is just as stupid as having the war on drugs we have right now. It ends up to more incarceration. It ends up being racially disparate. You look at New York with their stop and frisk program that they used to have. If you want police to have the power to take guns away from people, guess who's going to be most impacted by that? Black and brown people. So I'm always amused when the left tries to say that gun control is the solution. It isn't.
I think Shemek brings up an interesting point that 922G, which is the federal statute of felon in possession, if you go down to the downtown, to the federal holdover, there are a lot of people incarcerated on that right now. So prosecution of felons and firearms is something that has been going on for a long time, and disproportionately African American people in prison for that. Megan?
So, I think that Representative Dogan brings up some very good points, some of which I agree with in terms of, we know when there are regulations that they do disproportionately impact Black and brown folks. On the other side of that, as somebody who represents a district in the city of St. Louis, it's almost daily where I'm hearing from constituents, both in the ward I represent and throughout the city, who are saying we are tired of hearing gunshots. We are tired of feeling like we can't go out of our houses at night. We had an Emo's pizza driver that was shot and killed, ended up dying yesterday, just 2 blocks from my house.
Dave Matthews. And so I think people in the city have reached a level where they're just fed up, and I feel their frustration, and I don't think that there's a lot of easy solutions. Because am I in favor of regulations on guns? Yes. What I ideally would like to see is having to go through the same process that I have to go through to drive the deadly weapon that is my car. Get a license, have to take a test, know that your vision is in place, that you've gone through some kind of safety, mechanisms or training and things like that to properly know how to operate a firearm the way that you would learn how to properly operate a vehicle. But I think that that's just one piece of the puzzle. When we're looking at gun violence in particular, we can't talk about it without talking about the drug trade, without talking about poverty, without talking about mental illness, without talking about all of these other issues that also have to be addressed. So let's look specifically to you. And I know as soon as I say this word, that Robert here is going to say, those don't exist. Assault rifles.
Assault rifles is fine word.
So let's say you generally say, I don't have a problem with someone having a handgun. I don't have a problem with people owning firearms, shotgun to protect your house, whatever it may be, hunting rifles. Because there's a whole spectrum here. Okay, there's a spectrum on the one side that says that we can become a nation without guns, right? We have over 300 million guns in circulation now. It's really pretty difficult to see a scenario where that would happen, but there's a side of that spectrum. And there's another side of the spectrum that is in favor of almost no regulation whatsoever on guns. So let's say, the AR-15, which has been involved in a lot of these mass shootings, or other, powerful rifles, right? If those can be legally purchased, what rationale is it under the Second Amendment? What rationale is it to say, to protect me from the state in the event that the state is out of control? I need some anti-tank artillery, or I need some anti-aircraft guns on my roof.
Those are really expensive. So
we're talking about theoretical.
Theoretically,
we're in theoretical.
You can't stop the supervillain.
Yeah. A guy says, I want anti-tank guns on my roof. Anti-aircraft. Is there any limit on what someone should be able to purchase with regards to self-defense, with regards to firearms?
I would say there's no practical limit. That the practicality of the economy is what's going to keep people that pretty much just want to own a semi-automatic rifle, an assault rifle. That is a reasonable investment, and these outlandish armaments, there's a reason the government has them, because they have billions of dollars to throw around. It's impractical to man a one-man army. So, my only retort is really, I don't see it happening. You could have it be legal or illegal, and maybe a couple guys out in the middle of nowhere in Texas have a couple of them, but what really does the difference make?
The question is there a reasonable threshold to say, this is the threshold that,
if a guy in South City starts parking a tank in his driveway, he's going to be pretty unpopular. I don't know. There's just the culture will kind of determine what's allowed. And if you're a nutcase who's in danger, then we have to confront you about. Unless if you're marching around your yard every day with your many machine guns saying nobody come near me, eventually they're going to say, well, you need to go. But if you have some shit in your basement that is just big and powerful and scary, what difference does it make?
You're saying the culture will allow. if we're keeping up with the Kardashians and following Instagram models, the culture will allow. We're not in really a good place right now. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, that seems like the least of our worries is that would become some kind of urban arms race.
Megan or Maria, one of you want to respond to
Well, it's really disturbing to hear that. I'll be respectful for what he believes, but automatically I started thinking about San Bernardino, and I thought about the whole reason why I got active in the movement to reduce gun violence is because of Columbine. I mean, that's what motivated me to be a member of Missourians Against Handgun Violence in the first place. Had absolutely nothing to do with my life at that point because I wasn't living there. But children do not deserve to be put in these situations where there are people who have mental health issues and are trapped in closets and under desks, and have to go through that experience. There are a lot of people who have these tanks that we don't see in their driveways, or they have these compartments in their basements with multiple guns, and you're trying to figure out, is this the wardrobe for the season for a gun, or what is it with you and these multiple types of guns? I was just writing and talking to my intern this morning. When it's deer season and turkey season, you don't need an AK-47. It's not necessary. But at the same time, I understand your passion for the Second Amendment is equal to my passion for the First Amendment. And I learned that through several of the experiences we've had. So while I respect where you come from in your belief, there are too many dead people. This week alone, I was in a line at Snooks, and there was a woman who was in front of me kind of taking too much time, and I was getting a little bit agitated at first, and then I heard her say, my son was just killed by gunfire. And I couldn't be mad at this woman. I wanted to get my business done, but I couldn't be mad at her. And I mean, there are other people. Their lives are changed. There's another mother who I ran into just going door to door in the last couple of weeks. And she's been behind on her mortgage payments. I mean, when we are dealing with gun violence, people's lives change dramatically. And so before we get to the club in Florida, where there was a room full of Puerto Ricans, people from the Puerto Rican community who were just shot up, before we get to that, we've got to identify individuals who should not have access to guns. And it is with the policy that we have in place, it is not easy to determine who is going to go into a school and start shooting up students, or who is going to go into a theater and start shooting up other folks. I mean, our policies are not where they need to be right now. Now, if you want to protect your home, I'm all for it. My community told me a long time ago, when it comes to the Torah, and the lessons in the Torah, you have a right to protect your family and your household. You have a right for that. But that may be a high-heel shoe in some of our cases. But for other people, it may be a gun. I'm just saying that we need stronger laws.
Now, Megan, you've been involved in issues of mass incarceration, and we briefly alluded to this before. We know that a lot of people are incarcerated, both in the Missouri Department of Corrections, St. Louis City Workhouse, federal. I mean, the feds, that's their go-to charge. They can't get you on nothing else and get you on the felon in possession charge. A lot of people are opposed to mass incarceration, but are for stricter enforcement of gun laws when, that's obviously one of the things that leads people to jail. And I just want to put this out here as anecdotal information. So I have, a lot of people I know are convicted felons. It's very easy to be someone out in West County, no disparagement to West County, or be someone in a low crime area, very safe area, or someone that doesn't have a history. And you may be out in the streets, but that may not matter to anyone else. What you had 20 years ago is what's on their mind. And there are, in a city with over 200 homicides and hundreds of more shootings every year, they don't feel safe to leave their house without a firearm. they don't feel comfortable. And they may have been convicted of a nonviolent felony 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but under state and federal laws, they're still not allowed to carry a firearm or even defend their property with a firearm. Do you feel that needs to be revisited? Do you think there needs to be a time, or say, okay, if this is a nonviolent conviction, or if there's been certain years from this conviction, do you think that needs to be revisited?
I mean, I do, and one of the things that we see a lot in the city of St. Louis is UUWs, unauthorized use of a weapon, and the thing that has always irked about me, about it, is you can legally be possessing your firearm, and then you have drugs. It could be a very small amount of marijuana. That's how kind of these two things intersect for us. And then suddenly that's a much higher charge. And you don't even have to be using the marijuana. You don't have to be intoxicated in any way. You just have to have it on you. And so I do think we need to revisit laws when it comes to things like that. If you are not using a gun in a reckless manner, if you are not endangering somebody else, if you are not endangering yourself, if you would otherwise legally be possessing that firearm, but you have some marijuana on you, that shouldn't end up in a higher charge. That shouldn't put you in the workhouse. But what we do see is that is often used as a means to lock folks up. And so you'll see a lot of the charges of people sitting at the workhouse there for unauthorized use of a weapon. And when people hear that, they think, oh, it's somebody that was like recklessly shooting, or something like that, which really isn't the case. And so I think there's some nuance to these issues. And so the question is, how do you regulate guns in a way that decreases gun violence, that is punitive to people who are not using them in a safe manner, while also balancing that people do have rights to possess firearms. And I'm not one of those people on the left who thinks we should take away all guns. I think that is just never going to happen, especially with how many we have in circulation in this country. So the question becomes, how do we, given the amount of firearms that we have, how do we create a system that allows for responsible use, that provides penalties for when they're not used responsibly, and ensuring in there that we are not falling into the same traps that we have with the war on drugs and disproportionately impacting people of color because of the way that these laws are structured. And I think that makes all of this just a very complicated topic, on top of the fact that St. Louis has really high gun crime rates, really high homicide rates, and a lot of folks are just kind of at their wits' end in terms of what to do. And I think there's a natural disposition to want to blame the state and say, well, it's because we have such lax gun laws, and I think that is part of it. But I also think that there's a lot of education that we don't do around gun ownership and what it means to properly store a gun and make sure that it doesn't get into the hands of somebody that shouldn't have it. And so all of that needs to happen.
So, Representative Shamed, you represent a district out in West County, Republican district, and you're in Jeff City. What do you think your Republican colleagues in Jeff City would, because we know they're pretty pro-gun, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think they would think about this issue, about saying there's a time period where gun rights should be restored? You should have a full restoration of your gun rights, unless you're a convicted murderer or you're convicted of shooting somebody already. How do you think that would play in Jeff City? Because I think I'm a little skeptical that that would play well.
No, I think people would be surprisingly open to some of those ideas. I mean, if you take a look at what a lot of my colleagues and a lot of other Republicans talk about when we get to the debate over marijuana legalization, one of the concerns they put out is that intersection of our drug laws and our gun laws. The fact that if you do legalize for medicinal or for recreational purposes, then people could get caught up on their Second Amendment rights. And you don't want to put people in the position of having to choose between their right to alleviate their suffering if they need medical marijuana and their right to bear arms. So I think that's something that we need to consider. when we look at legalizing marijuana for those purposes. And I think, it sounds really easy for people to say there ought to be a law. That's the easiest thing in the world to say, right? But to me, the most important law of all is one that was never passed by any legislature and can never be repealed, and that's the law of unintended consequences. And so I'll give you an example. One thing that we had a lot of controversy over a couple years ago in 2016 was Senate Bill 656, which was the bill that legalized what we call constitutional carry, allowing people to carry weapons without a permit. And it also enacted Stand Your Ground. And because of the Trayvon Martin situation and some others that we've seen around the country, there was a lot of consternation about, you're passing Stand Your Ground, that's going to be racist, or that's going to lead to people being shot unnecessarily and all this. Well, the reason that we in these other states have passed down Stand Your Ground laws is because if you don't, you have what's called a duty to retreat. And that means in a situation where somebody is threatening your life, you cannot defend yourself legally. There was a case in Connecticut just this past week. African-American gentleman was working at a Dunkin' Donuts, and these people were robbing his store, and he pulled out his weapon and fired at one of them, and he got prosecuted. He got in trouble for defending himself because he had a duty to retreat. And I'm glad that we passed a law in Missouri saying that you do not have a duty to retreat. You can legally defend yourself with a firearm if you have a right to be there. If you're in a store, if you're in your home, and someone comes up on you and threatens you, you should be able to defend yourself. We had a similar debate with this legislation that law enforcement was pushing this year, trying to protect police dogs, where they said we need to protect these police dogs because they do dangerous work. And some of them have been assaulted while doing that work. And we thankfully were able to defeat that bill because that bill didn't provide for self-defense. If a dog charged at you, there was no way to protect yourself. Right. And I think everyone should and probably does agree on the principle of self-defense. You need to be able to have a weapon because, as Megan and Maria both talked about and have experienced, if you're in a community where there is unfortunately a medium or a high level of violence, who's going to choose obeying a law over protecting their family?
Well, you mentioned police dogs, and I just want to take this moment to say R.I.P. Paul Reeder, was a very close friend of mine who's now passed away. Paul, we were in high school, we got into a fight, not me and him, but me and some other young men. He shot one of the young men and ended up in a foot chase for police, and then shot the police dog. So the St. Louis police run a story with a big picture of the dog and a whole article about the dog, and in the last paragraph they said also shot, and they gave the name of the person that Paul shot. So R.I.P. Paul Reeder. Now, moving on to the next question about guns. Every time there's a mass shooting, and I think it's really, we have to as Americans recognize this, that in many countries, homicide is a rare thing. A murder is a rare thing, right? And that one murder will be national news story for days, and numerous articles written about it, and the whole country will reflect upon it. Murder is so common in the city of St. Louis alone. I mean, it's all over the country, but let's focus on St. Louis and St. Louis Metro, that if the murder happens at the wrong time, it may not even get covered by the news at all. You know what I'm trying to say? That's how common homicide is. Some days there's so many shootings in St. Louis, 10, 11, 12 shootings, that, there's just not the resources to cover them all. If it's a black homicide, an African-American victim, it has to be something abnormal. Kill with an axe, double, triple homicide, or something to even make the news. If it's a white homicide, it's usually going to make the news. That's just the reality. The data will back that up. That's the situation we're in, where homicide, violence has become normalized. So I want to ask this question. This leads into the mass shooting. There's so many mass shootings. When you say San Bernardino, I'm thinking, which one was that? You know what I'm trying to say? There's so many of them. We're so normalized to it. Something about Chattanooga. I had to look it up. What the hell happened in Chattanooga? There's so many of them. You forget about it. And so the thing comes in is the mental health question. And I was just reading something last night on Facebook from a far left critic of Hogg and Emma Gonzalez, the Parkland students. They were saying that, I don't know, some kind of rant. But a criminal is always going to get a gun. If you don't know that, you think everybody driving in the city of St. Louis with Illinois license plate is from Illinois. You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, what I'm saying? I think if you're sitting in a coffee shop,
That's so St. Louis.
right. If you're sitting in a coffee shop with a bunch of gender studies majors and English lit people, oh yes, it'd be rather extraordinary. You pass the law. That ain't how it works. People gonna get guns. I mean, criminals gonna get guns, right? And now the technology is easy to manufacture guns. You can make bullets, okay? But when you talk about Parkland, this is a nerdy, awkward high school dude. Notice nerd culture never gets attacked, and all these dudes are nerds. You know what I'm trying to say? Side note. A crazy guy, trying to say, he's not a street dude. He's not running the streets of Miami buying guns in the streets. He's not running the Sunrise in Fort Lauderdale to get guns in the streets. He has to get guns the square way. Going to the gun show, going to the gun store, whatever it may be. Isn't that reasonable to say if someone is experiencing, schizophrenia or various mental health issues, that isn't it very reasonable to say this person should not have access to firearms?
So the libertarian argument is that it's a slippery slope that if you give the government the power to decide who's crazy, then they can start deciding that
They do have that power already, though.
Well, and resisting to that power is the idea that, they could just start declaring their political enemies crazy. If you don't like Trump, well, you must be crazy and you definitely shouldn't have guns and then you can't stop what we do. That's extremely unlikely. But being able to always have the ability to plausibly threaten that if things go really badly, we do have the last resort to defend ourselves, that we won't just line up and all get
So hypothetical, Norman Bates. You want Norman Bates with AR-15?
I wouldn't have an AR-15
Right.
for sure.
Right.
So I don't have a problem with really the way we can have it right now. I mean, 99.9% of the people that if they have the means to law-abidingly go and buy an assault rifle can. Right now, it only affects a tiny minority. So the purpose of having them is achieved by just having a critical mass of these in circulation, that the people that run the government, they have it really good. They're making trillions of dollars on this. They don't want to become tyrannical. They don't want to disrupt things. They don't want this whole thing to stop. They don't want to stop getting paid. They don't want people to get angry and start shooting back. So I don't think anything is ever going to become tyrannical or bad. But having the threat present makes it so that the elites will never do anything beyond the pale, because the threat is real and it's there. There's just too many guns in circulation. They can't take them away. If they try to become North Korea, then at a very minimum, some people would start resisting and they would start making significantly less money. So just solely giving the self-interest of the people in charge, us having guns and them having their power, is at an even balance and society is stable and marches on.
So we start coming to North Korea, Jamie Allman, they're going to tool up and say,
no, I'm not saying they're going to save us. I'm going to say, even if they tried to resist, it would be so disruptive that the steady income that the people at the top are enjoying would become much more chaotic, and they wouldn't be in good position. So they don't want to push at things at all. So it's a power balance that we enjoy.
Maria, after Parkland shooting, I was down in Dallas-Fort Worth, where there's just endless, crazy bumper stickers. I mean, I think that's the thing. I mean, there's so many that I want to stop and take a picture, but I don't want to get killed because people are driving so fast down there, and it really drives crazy in Texas. And I'm thinking to myself, these people cutting me off on the road, and these people swerving through lanes, going 100 miles an hour, never using their turn signals. This is like school shooter culture. We've become like a society of school shooters. No one has any regard for anyone's safety. They're driving 100 miles an hour, they're cutting you off. They're not using their turn signals. they're on your ass right behind you in traffic. It's just like this low respect for human life. And I'm thinking, and I'm generally, to be honest with you, a pro-gun guy. I'm generally a pro-gun guy, but I'm thinking about this. I'm saying, man, I wonder if this lunatic has a gun because I'm scared to flip him off. Turn out one, and I'm thinking about a Bob Romatic. Do we want Bob Romatic with firearms? Trying to say, I mean, this is a loose cannon. So, in the state of Missouri, Missouri, I should say. I said I was going to stop saying Missouri. In the state of Missouri, Republican legislature, what can you do to keep guns out of the hands of Norman Bates?
Well, let me tell you what I've tried to do in the past. There was a piece of legislation that I have filed, I want to say in 2013, that basically mandated parents who have guns in their homes reported to the schools. And it was on CNN. It was a big deal. Oh, we shouldn't do that, then everybody will know. Well, here's the deal. I've got kids who bring guns to schools in University City. When Connecticut occurred, 2 days before, we had a 10-year-old shoot another 10-year-old. 2 days after Connecticut, we had a 17-year-old shot in University City. So when you ask me questions like that, all I think about is what we should be doing. We should be mandating anytime a gun is stolen and the owner finds out that the gun is stolen, it should be reported so that we can close crimes. Anytime there is a parent or a grandparent who has guns, and I'm just speaking of 63130, just one zip code, where there are students who have brought guns to school, where there are underage kids who have shot other kids by accident, where there have been drive-by shootings, in one zip code. And every single one of those lives is really important, every single one of them. And so that's why I kind of want to push back. I do want to push back on what Robert was saying earlier, because we do have a responsibility on the local, state, federal level to make sure that all of our communities are safe. I'm not trying to take away your turkey season or your deer season. I'm not trying to do that. But what I am trying to safeguard is that young man who happens to be my intern and 15 years old, who goes door to door with me and who's an activist in the streets, is not misrepresented and someone wants to shoot him. That's a conversation that we actually have every single day. Is that not a conversation we have? I take the responsibility of a 15-year-old young black man every single day, and I'm nervous that if he sounds maybe too smart because he's a genius from DeSmet, that someone's going to get upset with him because he's such a smart young man. And so that does impact me. I think about, again, the 17-year-old, and I could tell you the street, in the 3rd Ward where there was a drive-by shooting, the alternative school, the grandfather who was absolutely remiss when his 10-year-old shot another 10-year-old. I mean, that stuff is real, and then it hits close to home, and you start thinking about your children, your own children. And I think what we were talking about today, because this is a conversation we have every single day. Every single day when we're hitting the pavement, we're talking about guns. It doesn't matter if the person is black or white or rich or poor or Democrat or Republican. The people that I talk to in 63130 understands that we have a problem. Every single Christmas, I go to the Juvenile Justice Center in Clayton. 66% of all of the kids who are in the Juvenile Justice Center have some kind of mental health background. Within our public school system, at least 35% of the people who are in North County schools have some type of mental health background issue. And I'm only accounting for the people who live in my hood. I'm not accounting for the people who live in Chesterfield, because I don't represent Chesterfield. But a lot of these Dylan Roofs that you see don't look like the people from my neighborhood. Right. But those are the ones who are causing incidences like Oklahoma, like South Carolina, North Carolina. So mental health backgrounds is very, very crucial. And I wanted to just for a moment get back to something that Schmed should have said from his conservative perspective, which we all should be concerned about, even on the liberal perspective. And that is when we're talking about search and seizure, when you have, if you're trying to protect your gun or whatever, you may have marijuana or whatever, the federal law at this point, which, what's his name, Mr. Justice, is trying to push, is that you can seize all of the property of an individual, and there's a very small group of Republicans who actually want to protect the property of individuals who may have either guns on their property or have drugs on their property, and it's a very small group of people. Y'all aren't real advocates for that, but it's something that most of us as liberals would support, is being able to maintain your own property even if you have a little joint.
Moving on to Shamed, the last question with regards to guns. Is there a disconnect between, again, if you shoot at me, I'm shooting back, and I'm going to let the Lord have mercy, because I ain't going to have none, okay? So I'm not a peace nigga, I'm not a hippie, I'm not none of that. And I believe fully everyone has a right to defend themselves, defend their families, defend their property, etc. But is there not something unhealthy going on with guns in America? Let me give you an example. Irving, Texas, there's a big mosque there, the Islamic Center of Irving. You have a group of, I don't know what they are, some local organization. They stand out on the sidewalk in front of the mosque with with AR-15s and assault rifles and signs, no Sharia law in Texas, stuff like that, right? Is there this kind of rural, conservative gun fetish that is unsettling to people that fall outside of that demographic? Because these are signs that are tying their guns with a particular political philosophy, which is, xenophobic in nature, which is targeting not just a mosque, there's a school there, so there's families coming in with their children. And even in the state of Missouri, you have guns discussed in Jefferson City by people from districts that are not facing the level of murder, of death, of gun violence that you're seeing in St. Louis and in Kansas City. Is there a cultural divide on this issue? And should people that fall outside of that, white, Republican, conservative demographic be somewhat alarmed?
I think there's a lot of cultural similarities, if anything, right? I mean, black folks and white folks love their guns. I mean, you talk about folks marching at an Islamic center. I don't think that's an appropriate thing to do. But, if you go on YouTube or go on your Facebook, any of your social media, you'll find kids in our hoods who love their guns and are showing them off and are, just as into different types of weapons as anybody else in the rural areas are. I don't think the issue that we have with crime and violence is an issue about the weapons. It's an issue about that lack of respect for human life. The fact that you could get into an argument with your girlfriend and shoot her because you disagreed with something she did. The fact that people in our neck of the woods are shooting people over, $2. The fact that people are just shooting randomly and killing innocent bystanders. That's an issue where people just don't respect or care about human life. Or if you look at actually the most prevalent form, which we haven't talked about, of gun deaths, which is by suicide. And that's something that it doesn't matter what type of weapon you use or what you use to commit suicide. Unfortunately, guns are much more likely to be successful suicide attempts than the other methods people use. But you look at those celebrities who killed themselves recently, Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, neither one of them killed themselves with a gun. I think what we really need to, at the end of the day, focus on is how do we heal broken human beings? How do we heal a broken culture? And that's something I, as an elected official, I'm not going to be able to solve those problems myself. None of us can do that through government. But I think our society needs a lot of soul searching, a lot of healing, and a lot of focus on those mental health issues, on those issues of why are people, wanting to kill themselves? Why are they wanting to abuse drugs? This heroin epidemic we see where people will look at a death on TV and they say, oh man, that person had that fentanyl in their stuff, like, and died right away. Let me get that. That's what I need because that's strong enough.
Right. So we got to close out the guns, but I know Megan was itching to say something, and Maria, I know she supports in the state that I think there's a lot of things they want to do to help fix broken people that they'd like to get a little help with across the aisle. I'm assuming, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we got to move on to ganja, to weed, and I got a little green in my Hawaiian shirt. Megan's wearing green.
As
always.
As always, too.
Yeah. Maria's wearing green.
I'm the only one with a leaf on my shirt. So.
You're wearing
Flat.
yeah. But you look like a pothead. But,
I think we should legalize recreational marijuana.
right. So the thing about weed is, like I was saying when we began, I don't really think in the coming years there's going to be a big argument on weed. I think that you have, and if I can pontificate for a minute, I think you have an older generation that it's always been illegal. We want to keep it illegal. That's just the way it is, damn it, and that's the way it's going to be. I think once you get to people, say, under 50, okay, so I'm 43, and I can tell you we were smoking a lot of weed when I was in middle school and in high school, okay, and people, and the rich kids out in West County were smoking even better weed, you know what I'm trying to say, and the kids out in the rural areas, they were smoking because they might have been growing and shit, so everybody was smoking weed, like North City, North County, we were actually getting bad weed. We were getting the worst weed, trying to say. But, I think it's changing. I think when you look at the legislature now, there's politicians in Jeff City that Maria hangs out with, kicks it with. I think, these are people that, grew up where marijuana's been normalized. And even with the baby boomers, a lot of them were smoking weed. You know what I'm saying? My dad was a big pothead back in the day. That may explain, some of my mental deficiencies. But how, as the two Republicans here, how long is the Republican Party going to, I know you're against it, but looking at the party, how long is the party going to hold on to, damn it, it's been illegal, we're going to keep it illegal, that's just the way it's going to be?
That is a good question. Trump, and I think it was the early 90s, he gave an interview where he said all drugs should be legalized and the drug war completely. Of course,
he said everything.
He said everything.
Right.
So he's kind of seems like he's kind of just following the lead of the people, the lobbyists, and whoever is been running the show all along. So I don't really expect drastic change during him. But I'd say the Republican Party is not going to, the gay rights thing. It was building and building and building. They had this many states, and then it was 10 and 15, and then they just, all right, forget it. It's just over. So it's probably going to build at that point. Once we get to like 15 states where it's legal or something like that, it'll just become federal legal by default. The party's going to, they're going to resist as long as possible. Just like you said, the older generation is heavily entrenched in the hierarchy of the Republican Party. The people that are over 50 and will continue to be alive running the party probably for another 10, 20 years. But yeah, it's going to come from the state level, I think, by having a plurality of states legalize it.
And Shemay, you have in this state party, obviously evangelicals are a big force in the state party, Christian conservatives. Many of them opposed to loosening marijuana laws. How long do you think till the party really changes on this issue?
Well, one thing about politicians is they know how to read polls and they know where the people are. And you look at the polling on medical marijuana and it's off the charts. I've polled my district on it every year since I've been elected, and it's always 2-1 in favor of medical marijuana. Now, recreational, my voters, and I think most Republicans aren't there in terms of full support. But I think on medical, and we have 3 ballot initiatives that are going to be on the ballot in November that are probably going to pass overwhelmingly. And I don't think you're going to see the legislature try to overturn that. They're not going to be able to for a couple of them because they're going to be in the Constitution. But I don't think there's any appetite for people to say, okay, so the voters decided they want this and we're going to take it away. I just don't see that happening. And it's really just a matter of persuading the people of Missouri where our drug laws should be. We have 33,000 people incarcerated in the state of Missouri, and if we continue with the increase in our prison population, a lot of that has to do with drug offenses. If we continue locking more people up, we're going to have to build 2 new prisons. And Republicans are fiscal conservatives. Nobody wants to build 2 new prisons. So everything we can do to make sure we don't have that increase, whether that's looking at the drug laws, whether that's, and this is something I actually talked to the governor about. I met with him yesterday in his office, which was awesome. But I talked about our incarceration rates and the fact that we just have a ton of people in prison who probably shouldn't be there from a safety standpoint. One of the people I'm so proud of, that's why I'm wearing this shirt, is Jeff Mazansky. We petitioned Governor Nixon back in 2015 and got him out. We had 2/3 of the legislature, including Senator Chappelle Nadal. I thank her for her support. Most of these Republicans who supported getting him out, because he has served 20 years for nonviolent marijuana offenses. And Jeff's not the only nonviolent offender in there who could be let out. And the worst thing he might do is roll up a joint, you know?
If there's any dude, like I said, Robert Vroman looks like a pothead, but if there's anybody I look at and say, man, I can't imagine this dude smoking weed, it's Governor Parson. I can't see that dude smoking weed, dancing, doing anything fun. Now, Brighton's, he probably smoked some weed at some point in his life, but who knows? But that would just be my guess. I would say Brighton probably smoked a couple blunts in high school. And now he's free to smoke as much weed as he wants because he doesn't. So
he realizes now he needs to.
Right, he needs to. So Maria, what have you been doing in Jeff City with regards to marijuana laws?
I just support marijuana medicinally, recreationally, and what really was the turning point for me, there are several of them, but one was in 2014, and everyone in the room knows what we were going through then, but Dave Chappelle came to Ferguson and he said in a certain amount of time, about a month, they raised the profit margin was $7 billion, something like that. And I looked and I was like, wait a minute, this is something that can really impact financially either our schools or provide services. And then I had a friend who is a veteran who tried to commit himself, and he is a regular marijuana smoker and lived in the DC area for some time because you can grow your own marijuana. And then I have, I have a couple of evangelicals in my family, and they're pro-life evangelicals, and you can never talk about certain things with them. But my aunt had breast cancer, and they live in Colorado, and apparently there's some lotion that you can use that is marijuana based that she uses for her cancer. And when I went to go visit her, I was like, you have a product that has marijuana in it? And she was like, yes, because it helps me with my cancer. And so at that point, I was like, well, shoot, she's an evangelical, so if she's supporting some of this stuff, I could support it. So, at first I supported medicinal just because there are a lot of people going through a lot of stuff. When I walk door to door, there are a whole bunch of people who's smoking in their house. I can just tell you that right now. There's a whole bunch of people smoking in their house. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but I get contact. I certainly get contact, and people support it. And so, I support what my community does, but just really there are a lot of people who go through a lot, and having marijuana helps them get through rough times. There are a lot of people who have triggers and PTSD, and I support them for that. And a lot of people who have ADD, ADHD, I supported for that. So I've been, luckily all these years, I've filed legislation dealing with full legalization of marijuana, and my community has been very supportive, even the 80-year-olds. So that's what really got me when I started.
You city people love.
When I started getting my questionnaires back, and they're 82-year-olds who want marijuana, I'm like, well, damn. If they want it, then hey, I'm going to try to make sure you get it.
All right. So, Megan, Maria talked about the state, and you've been doing some things regarding marijuana in the city of St. Louis.
Yes. So last fall, introduced an ordinance in the city of St. Louis that essentially would have legalized personal possession and home grow in the city, basically saying that we are no longer using our police resources to enforce laws against folks if they have 2 ounces or less, or growing 6 plants or less, are not using it on like school property, things like that. So our current board president fought me tooth and nail on it. And so it didn't pass by the end of session. But as soon as the November elections are over, we'll be ready to refile it. We don't want to do it before November, just with all of the medical initiatives. We don't want to cloud all of the understanding about what's going on.
Do you anticipate that being a big issue in the president race, or?
I do. I think that the current president is on the wrong side of history on this issue, and I just got done doing 28 wards in 28 days, where I knocked a different ward every single day. And I didn't. The only question I asked people was, "What's on your mind? What could we do better in the city of St. Louis?" And the amazing number of people who said legalize marijuana, and the number of people who, as the senator was saying, you open the door and you're getting the contact high, and it wasn't just young folks; it was a lot of seniors. And I think that we have to recognize that. So I mean, we also have to kind of look at this in a broader context. When you look at states that have fully legalized recreational, most of the time it has started with a city that has pushed the envelope, and that is acted in advance of the state to show, look, the sky didn't fall, everything didn't go to hell, like, we're okay. And I think that the reason the city of St. Louis really needs to do this is because of all of this research that is showing that when you legalize marijuana, heroin overdose deaths drop by about 30%. And we had 75% of the overdose deaths for the entire state of Missouri in 2017 occurred in the city of St. Louis. 75%. We had more people overdose and die from heroin in this city than died from homicide.
And the city is a very small percentage of the state population.
Yes. But we have the convergence of the heroin drug trade here.
And people come here to buy.
You have people coming here, and that accounts for that high number. But we're not putting the resources as a city toward addressing addiction. And so if we can do something that doesn't cost the city money, actually saves us money if we're not using our police resources in this way, and then it saves lives at the same time, it's common sense.
Just to close out on marijuana before we open up to questions, I just want to say this about weed. And I'm not a big, I partake every now and then. I'm a very lightweight, I'm not no serious weed smoker. I got people in my family, my little brother and sister, not to mention no names, that like daily, trying to say, and they're immune to it, not at that level, what I'm saying. Every now and then I have trouble sleeping, or sometimes you're on a date and the other party wants to partake and it's whatever. It's not like I'm enthusiastic about it, but it's whatever, right? But here's the thing. Of all the things in the world you can get worked up about, okay, you get worked up about somebody smoking weed. All the things you could be doing. Now, alcohol is actually a pet peeve of mine because the roads, especially on the weekends, are full of drunk drivers. And the drunk driving fatalities are through the roof nationally. And I don't know if you saw the video, Pride here in the Grove. They were out drunk fighting in the street, dozens of fights in the street. And barroom brawls are common. And they lead to, my brother-in-law 2 years ago killed, started in a barroom fight, went to his car, they waited on him, shot the car and killed him down at a Cuz bar in Soulard. All the violence, the domestic violence, all the violence and the drunk driving associated with alcohol. I don't see how you can have any rationale that alcohol can be legal. I'm not saying make alcohol illegal. We tried that, didn't work very well. how can it be legal and weed be illegal when all you want to do when you smoke weed is you want to eat some Cheetos, eat some Red Hot Rippers, and go to sleep? You know what I'm saying?
Have great sex. Yeah.
Well, there's that observation for real. You know what I'm saying? But I ain't trying to get myself in trouble. You know what I'm saying? But
that's just what they tell me.
There's a rumor out there. There's a rumor out there. So Anyway. That's the deal. I don't see why anybody's caught up on some marijuana. Now, Shutman is laughing, man. Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and Green Party, everybody like to have a little fun. So let's open it up to questions to the crowd. Guns or ganja? Any question? No question is too smart, and no question is too dumb. Yes, Mark.
My fear with statewide change would be that the Republican Party, which is, thanks to Biden's, really made itself butt buddies with law enforcement, would be too unwilling to part ways with law enforcement, which is kind of not just taken on the drug war, but kind of like take it on as a personal mission of glory. And my fear is that the law enforcement lobby just won't let go of marijuana to any degree, whether it be medical or recreational. My question with Shaman would be, is that something that is true? And then furthermore, building on Megan's efforts, my fear is that if there is any local efforts made on the parts of local politicians to legalize or decriminalize, that we would have yet again the state of Missouri come in and say no, just like they did with minimum wage. Yeah. And would Republicans yet again be willing to be hypocrites on the idea of small government?
John?
Mm-hmm. So I think on the local control issue, that's an argument that I've used constantly with my Republican colleagues. And if you look at the battle in the Trump administration between Jeff Sessions, who wants, maximum enforcement everywhere. He doesn't even think that states should be allowed to have recreational or medical, which is ironic given his perspective as a Confederate-loving Southerner or whatever, that he doesn't support states' rights when it comes to that. But I think in the administration, President Trump has agreed, thanks to Senator Gardner of Colorado, that the federal government is going to stay out of that. If the voters in your state want to do what they're going to do and legalize, they're fine with that. And the Republicans in Congress are actually moving towards some legislation that will finally get some sensible banking regulations in place so that...
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that you don't have these business owners running multi-million-dollar businesses having to carry around cash all the time, so that you can actually bank. Because that's one of the hurdles that the states are facing when they legalize it, is they can't do anything on that front. And I think money talks. And so, the fact that we could miss out on all this potential revenue, because if you're the last state to legalize it, you don't see the benefit. I think that's going to trump any of the holdouts in law enforcement, because you don't hear a lot of law enforcement people saying, you know what I like doing? Busting people for drugs and not solving homicides. They got priorities, and the priorities here in St. Louis or in Kansas City or in Springfield, which are three of the most violent cities in the country, they want to catch those bad guys and not spend their time, wasting it making pot arrests.
Well, I have a bet with Steve Smith, owner of the Royale, that Missouri will be one of the last 10 states to legalize weed. So we'll see how it plays out. So next question from the audience. Yes.
This is a really dumb question, but what is the correlation between, you said heroin, there's less heroin ODs if you legalize weed?
Yes.
Why, I was curious, why is that?
So it's basically harm reduction. So folks who are using heroin tend to be using it to quench some kind of mental illness or hurt, or and it escalates into an addiction that they can't stop. Marijuana does a lot of the same things, it's just not as harmful. And so what you'll actually see is folks who are working in the heroin addiction space will actually give their patients marijuana to help them wean off of heroin. and move them onto a drug that is a lot less harmful and allows them to function and be a part of society without having all of the negative effects that heroin does.
That's interesting.
I wanted to go, if it's okay, I wanted to go back to what Mark was saying. I cut Marquise off all the time. But there are former police officers who lobby in Jefferson City on behalf of marijuana. Also, this champion,
Gary Wigger.
Gary Wigger.
yeah,
Yes.
who's
Yes.
sitting
Yes.
right next to you. He is also a champion who is in Jefferson City and speaks on behalf from the veterans' perspective
Tom
on
Mandel.
marijuana.
Can I just say that
Hero.
my idea was shaped to the fact that I went to Kirkweed, and every day I went out in the senior parking lot. I saw Kevin McCullough, special relationship there, selling pot right out of the back of his truck, and I guess, and then Tom McCullough is fiercely anti-marijuana, as I recall, at least as it relates to black folks, and protesters. So my idea is that it's going to be generational.
The one thing that I would like to mention that no one's asked about, we talked about it earlier on, is the colorization of who is able to grow or produce marijuana when we get to that point. And in several different states that have approved this, it's been really, 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 really hard for people of color to be able to be part of this industry. And so as progressives or people who are just pro marijuana, we've got to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to profit in this. Because if you're only thinking from the financial perspective, this is great. This is golden. Colorado would say we didn't get all the money that we were promised for education, but we can learn from other people's mistakes. There are a lot of people who are out there who I have seen, who I have talked to, mothers whose children have OD'd, and it's really sad. And it's something that we have to deal with every single day, but we can't allow the colorization of the drug industry, no matter what it is, to impact a certain group of people more than others. We have to take care of everybody. Sorry, Marquis.
So we're moving on to the DeSmet Jesuit, the Spartans, right? Yeah. DeSmet Spartans, right? We beat y'all 53-0. Now, since they've got better, because they recruit all the kids from North County to play for them, they still suck, but they still all the good players from North County. But when it was fair and square, man, we used to beat y'all ass. So I'm just putting it out there. So Marquise, what is your question?
Well, I wanted to go back to the gun issues. So with guns, we see in other Western developed countries that they have stricter gun laws, and they also have lower death rates. And those policies that they have, we're arguing over years, and we can't seem to find the same solutions that they did, when obviously what they did worked, because they have lower crime rates, they have lower death rates by handgun violence. So I guess my question would be, why is that the case? And I would suggest that I think it has a lot to do with gun manufacturing companies pushing the gun culture with their money to try to create some kind of cultural divide, when it's really about them pumping more guns into the market and selling more.
That's a good question.
What's your response there, Robert?
Sure. So, the majority of the gun homicides we've alluded to, but not said specifically, are in the drug war. It's the drug dealers are in a very exposed position. They don't have police protection. They're selling illegal product. Anybody that wants to compete with them or get rid of them, all they have to do is walk up and bang, and they're gone. And it happens thousands of times a year all across the inner cities of America. While we're aware of it. So in England, for example, a country where there are no guns, there are fewer homicides, and there are drastically fewer gun homicides, but there are still murders. And it's the exact same thing. It's drug dealers are using knives to kill each other. So it's the motive of why it's not that there's so many killers, and it's not that the weapons are dangerous. It's that the victims are so exposed because they're trapped in this illegal market where they do not get the benefit of our normal protective institutions. And so they are just open mark for anybody that feels like taking what they got on them or just taking their job. So legalize drugs. That's the answer. End the drug war completely, not just marijuana, but every single drug. That eliminates all of the cartels and the violence behind the black market. The black market is what drives over half of the gun homicides. And in countries where it's very difficult to get a gun, it drives the homicides in general, where they just use the weapons other than guns.
But now, see, we can talk about. I believe in the black market to a degree for people of color, because we do every single thing we can possibly do to survive, and government always wants to tax us just for putting food on our table. There are a lot of people who are out there who are illegally involved in gun distribution and all that. Now, I would say that's wrong, and I would say also let's legalize. Now, I wouldn't say legalize heroin because I don't believe in that. But
then you still have a black market in heroin. Who will kill each other?
But what I am saying, the skill set. That's what I'm saying. The colorization of drugs, whether it's legal or not. The skill set it takes for a lot of these folks who are out here is incredible. And if we're going to legalize marijuana, then I want to make sure that people who have an amazing skill set are able to do something legally rather than through the black market at the same time, whether it's drugs or not. Like, through the black market, especially in third world countries. If it were not for the black market, people would not survive. We have so many families in our communities that are living generation on top of generation, and they're trying to figure out a way that they can make it. And some of them choose the black market, whatever that may be. And so I want to go back because, being conscious, and I know your wife is amazing, but being conscious of people of color and their opportunities should be the foundation of every single one of these conversations. Because we can talk about all this stuff, but at the end of the day, I still have to go home and I still see the vacant homes where people can't afford it. And if it were not for the black market of whatever it was, people would not have any homes, they would not have any electricity and so on.
Well, I got to cut it off right there.
Always cutting me off.
Okay, okay. I tell you what. Brief 30 seconds, Megan and Shamet each.
I was just going to say that to speak to the senator's point, there's a number of emerging things that are happening. Oakland, I think, is setting a very good example right now of what's essentially being dubbed as weed reparations. That folks who have been convicted of drug crimes and people who are people of color are given first access to the licenses to be able to benefit from this new economy. And I would hope that as Missouri moves toward that, that those are the types of policies that we're looking at, in addition to expungement, which is another thing that once we legalize in this state, we need to go back and be clearing out all those records and releasing folks from jail who are sitting there on these charges right now.
I'm glad that America is different than other countries in the world. I'm glad we have a Second Amendment that we respect and that is ingrained in our culture. I don't like the violence, obviously, but the Second Amendment is great. I just want it to be upheld and respected for all of us, whether that's a Philando Castile who was legally carrying, whether that Alton Sterling, all these shootings we've seen where black men were armed and they lost their lives over it. I think everyone's Second Amendment rights need to be respected. And the First Amendment, too. I'm a big First Amendment supporter, too. I think both of those they're in the order they're in for a reason.
All right, now, before we go, I just want to say two things. Number one, who's this guy with all the medals on right here?
The man.
Yes.
I want to say one thing.
What's your name, first of all?
I'm Tom Mund. I'm the past state commander for the Department of Missouri for the Veterans of 20 years, and I'm on Blue Coach Missouri's board and not the National Cannabis Industry Association. And for 51 months, I have studied the validity study to validate the validity of medical cannabis, starting for President Obama and now Trump and Sessions. Don't think anywhere in this industry that people of color have not had the opportunity to get in this industry because they have been begged. From California to Oregon to Missouri, I've got wonderful friends here. I'm trying to get into this business because this is going to be $1 billion deal. And you know what they say? Why? They don't want in. They don't want Uncle Tom on top of their ass. They don't want to deal with the government and all the bullshit that goes along with it. And I can understand their feelings. But there are some coming into the industry. We've got some wonderful people coming into the industry, and at the national level now, there's a big movement to attract as many people of color because we want everybody to know, especially here in Missouri, that this is an industry for the people. That's why New Approach Missouri's constitutional amendment was written the way it was, is so that everybody can get involved in it, because the prices for everything is moderately priced so that everybody can get into it. But it's going to take education through all sectors.
And just real quick, you're a VFW guy. When did you serve?
I've served for the last 42 years in special ops with the military and civilian operation. I've just flipped into the marijuana business for the last 51 months of my life, and it's the best thing I ever did in my life.
And the last thing is, I got a lot of heat, as Mark can tell you. Let me tell you something. One of the big problems in our country right now, you can tune in to MSNBC and you can hear the same shit all day. Any talking head on MSNBC, I can tell you exactly what they're going to say. It's going to be the same talking points, same people when they get activists on, it's going to be, the same kind of Ford Foundation language. I can tell you, I don't even have to listen to it. I can write what they're going to say. I can tell you what they're going to say. Turn it over to Fox News. It's the same confirmation bias. They're going to say the same shit, the same think tank pieces, American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, same stuff. Everybody is just talking to each other, listening to each other. I really make it a point to read things from across the spectrum, to listen to people across the spectrum. And people tell me, oh man, this Vroman, man, it's a bad guy, man. That's a bad guy. And I said, well, he might be a bad guy. I'm not the judge. I'm not the creator. But we're gonna sit down and talk to everybody. They tell me, oh man, Shamed, man, that guy's an asshole, man. Do you know what you voted for, man? And I said, well, man, hey, we can sit down and talk to everybody. Of course, Marie is my friend, Megan. We go back, and and so it's not as controversial from my side. I mean, if I'm running on the right type of thing, it might be controversial, to Bob Romantic fans or something. But
keep in mind, we did try to get you did want Jamie Allman on.
I did want Jamie Allman, and I'll tell you why I wanted Jamie Allman is because when I got fired from the Cleveland Cab, he had me on his show and turned about fair play. Trying to say it's.
And he threatened physical violence against me, so I didn't.
Well, yeah. But anyway, I'm willing to talk to anybody. I'm willing to have anybody on as a guest, and I like that. I want people to hear different opinions, and that's what it is, and that's the kind of format that I want to have. I tell my Republican friends that City Republicans, the St. Louis Speaks podcast Facebook group. Send them to subscribe on iTunes and your other services. Let's get a dialogue going on. We're all St. Louisans. We're all in the state of Missouri. By unfortunate luck, most of us, that's where our parents had sex, and we just ended up in St. Louis and in Missouri. Hey, I wish mine would have, had, somewhere else, Miami or something. So, but I'm stuck here, and that's what it is. So thanks for tuning in to St. Louis Speaks podcast. I hope you learned something.